Tape Jockey by Tom Leahy. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Bologna Times. Tape Jockey by Tom Leahy. Pettigill was, you might say, in tune with the world. It wouldn't even have been an exaggeration to say the world was in tune with Pettigill. Then somebody struck a sour note. The little man said, "Why, Mr. Bartle, come in. This is indeed a pleasure." His pinched face was lighted with an enthusiastic smile. "You know my name, so I suppose you know the bulletin sent me for a personality interview," the tall man who stood in the doorway said in a monotone, as if it were a statement he had made 1,000 times, which he had. "Oh, certainly, Mr. Bartell. I was informed by Section Secretary Andrews this morning. I must say I am greatly honored by this visit, too. Oh, heavens! Here I am letting you stand in the doorway. Excuse my discourtesy, sir. Come in, come in," the little man said, and bustled the bored Bartle into a great room. The walls of the room were lined by gray metal boxes that had spools of reproduction tape mounted on their vertical fronts. Tape recorders, hundreds of them. "I have a rather lonely occupation, Mr. Bartle, and sometimes the common courtesies slip my mind. It is a rather grievous fault, and I beg you to overlook it. It would be rather distressing to me if Section Secretary Andrews were to hear of it. He has a rather intolerant attitude toward such faux pas. Do you understand what I mean? Not that I'm dissatisfied with my superior. Perish the thought! It's just that—" "Don't worry. I won't breathe a word," the tall man interrupted without looking at the babbling fellow shuffling along at his side. "Mr. Pettigill, I don't want to keep you from your work for too long, so I'll just get a few notes and make up the bulk of the story back at the paper." Bartle searched the room with his eyes. "Don't you have a chair in this place?" "Oh, my gracious, yes. There goes that old discourtesy again, eh?" the little man Pettigill said with a dry laugh. He scurried around the room like a confused squirrel until he spotted a chair behind his desk. My chair for you, Mr. Bartle." Again the dry laugh. "Thanks, Mr. Pettigill." "Arthur, call me Arthur. Formality really isn't necessary among mid-echelon, do you think? Section Secretary Andrews has often requested I call him Morton, but I just can't seem to bring myself to such informality. After all, he is subprime echelon. It makes one uncomfortable, shall we say, to step out of one's class?" He stopped talking, and the corners of his mouth dropped quickly as if he had just been given 1 minute to live. You are only mid-echelon, aren't you? I mean, if you are subprime, I shouldn't be." "Relax, Mr. Pettigill. Arthur, I am mid-echelon, and I'm only that because my father was a man of far more industry than I. I inherited my classification." "So? Well now, interesting. Very. He must have been a great man. A great man, Mr. Bartle." "So I am told, Arthur. But let's get on with it," Bartle said, taking some scrap paper and a pencil stub from his tunic pocket. "Now tell me about yourself and the Melopsych Center." "Well," the little man began with a sigh and blinked his eyes peculiarly, as though he were mentally shuffling events and facts like a deck of cards. "Well, my life would be of little interest, but the center is of the utmost importance. That's it. I am no more than a physical extremity that functions in accord with the vital life that courses through the great physique of the center. No more. I ask no more than to serve the center and in turn my fellow citizens, whether they be prime, subprime, mid, or even sub-lower." He stopped speaking, affecting a martyr-like pose. Bartle covered a smile with his hand. "Well, Bartle, as you know, the center, the Melopsych Center, a thoroughly inadequate name for the installation, I might say, is the point of broadcast for these many taped musical selections contrived by Mass Psych as a therapeutic treatment for the various echelon levels. It is the great psychiatrist, the father confessor. For where can one bare one's soul, or soothe one's nerves and disposition frayed by a day's endeavor, better than in the tender yet firm embrace of music? Bartle was straining to follow the train of thought that was lost in the camouflage of Pettigill's flowery phraseology. You see all about you these many recorders, Mr. Bartle? Bartle nodded. On those machines, sir, are spools of tape. Music tapes. All music. My heavens, every kind. Classical music, jazz, western, all kinds of music. Some tapes are no more than a single melodious note, sustained for whatever length of time necessary to relax and please the echelon level home it is being beamed to. Oh, I tell you, Mr. Bartle, when the last tape has expended itself for the day, as our service code suggests, I leave this great edifice with a feeling of profound pride in the fact that I have so served my fellow man. You share that feeling, too, don't you, Mr. Bartle? Bartle shrugged. Pettigill paused and looked at the watch he carried on a long chain attached to a clasp on his tunic. A Benz chronometer, given to me by Section Secretary Andrews on the completion of my 25 years of service. It's radio synchronized with the master timepiece in Greenland. It gives me a feeling of close communion with my superiors, if you understand what I mean. Bartle did not. He said, "Am I keeping you from your work? If I am, I believe I can fill in on most of this back at the paper. We have files on the center's operation." The little man hurriedly put out a hand to restrain Bartle, who was easing out of the chair. "Not yet, Mr. Bartle," he said, suddenly much more sober. Then his incongruous pomposity appeared again. "My gracious, no! You aren't keeping me from my work. I just must start the mid-lower echelon tape. It won't take a moment. Tonight they receive Concerto for Ass's Jawbone. Sounds rather ridiculous, doesn't it? Be that as it may, there is a certain stimulation in its rhythmic cacophony. Aboriginality, yes. I would say it arouses a primitive exaltation." He flicked a switch above the recorder, turned a knob, and pressed the starter button on the machine. The tape began winding slowly from one spool to another. "Is it casting?" Bartle asked. "I don't hear a thing." Pettigill laughed. "My stars, no! You can't hear it. See?" He pointed at a needle doing a staccato dance on the meter face of the machine. "That tells me everything is operating properly. Mass Psych advises us never to listen to casts. The selections were designed by them for specific social and intellectual levels. It could cause us to experience a rather severe emotional disturbance." A peculiar look came over Bartle's face. "Is there ever a time when all the machines run at once? That is, when every echelon home is tuned to the mellow psych tapecasts?" Pettigill registered surprise. "Why, certainly, Mr. Bartle. Don't you know Amendment 34206B specifically states that all echelon homes must receive music therapy at 2300 hours every night? Of course, different tapes to different homes." "That's what I mean." "Haven't you been abiding by the directive, Mr. Bartle?" "I told you I owed my classification to my father's industry. I am definitely lax in my duties." Pettigill laughed, almost wickedly, Bartle thought. "What I'm getting at is," Bartle continued, "what if the wrong casts were channeled into the various homes?" "I remind you, sir, I am in charge of the center and have been for 30 years. Not even the slightest mistake of that nature has ever occurred during that time." "That I can believe, Pettigill," Bartle said, his voice edged with sarcasm. "But hypothetically, if it were to happen, what would the reaction be?" The little man fidgeted with his watch chain. Then he leaned close to Bartle and said in a barely audible whisper, "This isn't for publication in your article, is it?" You don't think the government would allow that, do you? No, this is to satisfy my own curiosity." "Well, since